Hey, this is Jimmy Beach with Alien Skin Software. I'm picking up where I left off in the last video where I made and saved a selection in Photoshop. I'm using Photoshop selections to drive the blurring effects and exposure to make a realistic looking shallow depth of field for this shot. Thanks again to my man Robert Lounsbury for letting me use it. So let's load a selection. Go up to Select, Load Selection, and we want Picture. Okay. Now, the marching ants visually confirm your selection. That's the varying white and black dashes around the picture. The effects work best when the Photoshop selection has a reasonably hard edge, so you can use feathering to clean up the edges of the selection if you want to, but keep it to a small radius. I'll say less than 5 pixels or so. Next, let's run exposure. I'll start off with the revert button. This sets the look to the original photo, so nothing's been changed in the shot that we see on the screen. Usually I start working exposure over here on the left by choosing a preset, and then on the right I make adjustments with the controls. However, this time I don't need to demo anything but the bokeh stuff, so I'll hide the left dock over here with the arrow. All I really need is this one panel, bokeh. First thing I'm going to do is delete the radial focus region. That's by default. For a shallow depth of field shot like this, I'll use Planar Region. The implied focal point is around the pitching mound, let's say, which is a little bit of a distance into this shot, so I need to add a little bit of blurring effects to the foreground too down here. If the mound were closer to the bottom edge of the shot, I could probably get away with a half planar region. All right, let's move this into position. So let me turn the bokeh amount up just a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. Makes it a little bit easier. And then I'll massage the placement of this so that it lines up with the picture's feet. And I'll pull this feathering edge out. Now I don't want to do it too wide. The blur will intensify from the main line here in the middle out to where it's 100% of the effect that you have applied. So if I have it right here where you see it cuts this other person in the background in half, that means that we're actually getting a more intense blur as we go up through that person, which will look fake. So we're going to pull that down, make sure that we don't have anybody in that, so the background, that is an even blur back there, even effect. This will help it look a little bit more realistic. Now I can choose the type of effect that I want to go with. I'll go through the presets here. I'll do traditional lenses, and I know that Robert, shoots with Canon, so I'll choose one of my favorites, the 85-1.2. So I'm going to adjust this amount down. I like that creamy blur, but way too much. We just want it to really emphasize this picture in the front. Don't need it to be very strong. That's pretty good, and we're pretty good to go. At the bottom of this panel are a couple of controls that I want to talk about. Grain matching. So there are two ways that you can add grain to your image in exposure. One, you can add them here by using grain matching, and the other is to use the grain panel. That's up here. See? Okay, what's the difference between the two? Easy. If you're applying bokeh to an image that already has grain, use grain matching. What it will do is apply grain only to the areas that are blurred by bokeh on this panel. On the other hand, if you're working on an image that does not have grain, which is most often the case, the grain panel is where you want to do the magic. Bam, right here. Okay? So this will apply Exposure's awesomely awesome grain across the entire shot, whereas the grain matching panel only applies it where it's being blurred by bokeh effects from the bokeh panel. Personally, I suggest adding grain to an image when you're using a forced depth of field effect like this. Doing so can help hide any sharp edges of the selection, and it will help blend and look more realistic. Alright peeps, I wanted to keep this video short and sweet, and I think we've covered the whole procedure for making realistic looking depth of field using exposure. Thanks for watching. This is Jimmy Beach. We'll see you next time.